It was not a senior captain such as Lacan who would command these troops, but the one who stood at the very height of this nation. The emperor, though, could not simply jump up and march out of the capital. As such, a substitute would be necessary. How long do you mean to deceive us with that assumed form? Lacan said, watching Jinchi through his monocle. Or rather, watching the man Kazuiitsu who wore Jinchi like a second skin. Zuiitsu swallowed heavily. He had always known this moment would come. Now it had arrived. It was time for him to face it. Chapter 17. Taban, tell me if you would. Is my medicine ready yet? Exactly once per day, Maomao was permitted to leave the room in which she was confined. This was in order to be taken under guard to Shenmei. Shenmei's room was so luxurious, one would never have believed it was in the middle of a fortress. The floor was covered by a thick rug from a foreign land. The furniture was also exotic in style. The air was filled with aromas of tea, flowers, and honey. The mistress of the room was reclining in an easy chair. A lady-in-waiting was polishing the nails of her left hand. A young man knelt nearby, massaging her feet. The room smelled strongly of incense. Behind Shenmei was a large bed. Several women were rolling around on it and giggling. Another scent filled the air as well, alcohol. The room smelled richly of decadence. Maomao sniffed audibly. She thought it was a mixture. Musk water formed the base, cut with several other ingredients. The women lounging on the bed looked oddly lethargic. It was hard to tell if they were drunk or if something else was the cause. Lulan was behind Shenmei, munching on a snack. Suhari was combing her hair. In another setting they might have looked like two sisters sharing a sweet moment, but here they looked only like master and servant. I believe it will take a little longer yet, Maomao replied. Gracious, is that so? Shenmei asked. With a wave of her fan she sent Maomao back out of the room. Once she was safely back in the hallway, Maomao let out a deep sigh. Then she saw a familiar face looking in her direction. Hey, apothecary. That smart electone, it was Kairuyu. She had never specifically told him her name, and he hadn't actually been introduced to her, which is why he simply called her apothecary. Behind him was a lady-in-waiting she took to be his minder, along with 4 other boys. Yes. How can I help you? She asked politely. What she wanted to say was, yeah, what is it, you little shit? But this was hardly the time or place. Even Maomao had a sense of self-preservation. With the lady-in-waiting and her burly guard present, she could not afford to level any abuse at him. You creepy, he exclaimed. I want to smack him so bad. Maomao made a private promise to herself. The next time they were alone she would give him the noogie of a lifetime. Sadly, it didn't seem like she would have the chance anytime soon. If you don't need anything from me, sir, I would like to go back to my room. Maomao's situation was far from ideal, but she didn't object to what she was actually doing. She had a good supply of drugs. They would have been useful even in a proper medical office, although many of them were getting old. She was also thrilled to have so many written materials to work with. Whoever the apothecary before her had been was quite talented. Hey, were there any other women there? Yes, sir. I mean, for what it's worth. They weren't at their best to be seen by a young child. That level of disarray was not meant for little boys to witness. It was true that by the time she was Kairuyu's age, Maomao had seen men and women together more often than cats or dogs. Any blushing embarrassment she might once have felt about it was long gone. But this was different. So my mom is in there. Did she look okay? I know she has been busy with work. After a second, Maomao replied, I'm afraid I couldn't tell you. I don't know which of the women you mean. Oh, Kairuyu looked downcast. There wasn't much Maomao could say. She thought she knew which woman was his mother, but she hadn't been fit to tell him about it. Guess that's how it goes, huh? Mom is busy. Maybe I should have waited back at the village for her. So that was his story. She did not know whose idea it had been, but it had been a wise choice. It was better to have him stay at the hot springs town than to see his mother here. Perhaps it had even been his mother's idea. If you will excuse me, she said. Oh, hey, Kairuyu looked like he was about to say something to Maomao, but then he glanced around and was silent. He had something he wanted to say, but this wasn't the right time or place. If I may, he said. Yes, of course. Maomao returned to her room. Several more days passed, and they were much like the others. The one thing that seemed strange to Maomao was hearing children's voices outside her door. Kairuyu and the others, perhaps. Each time they came close, a lady in waiting would scold them and lead them away. It seemed they were supposed to stay clear of this room. I suppose I understand. Small animals were brought into Maomao's room for experiments. She kept the place as clean as she could, but it wasn't exactly hygienic. It does sort of stink in here. The smell came partly from the rats. Sometimes, however, there was a whiff of something else, something truly vile. A smell not unlike animal dung or rotten eggs. She often caught the smell drifting up from the stairs when she was taken to Shenmei's room. Perhaps they were doing something on one of the lower levels. She thought back to the disassembled Fafer she had seen at the village. Perhaps they were researching the weapons here as well. She hoped nothing would explode. But at the moment, she had no time to worry about such things. The materials left by the previous apothecary showed that in pursuit of an immortality drug, many experiments had been done regarding a resurrection drug too. Her predecessor had not been far from either location, but they had not been precisely close either. However, Suhari had successfully revived based on these experiments, so they had been worthwhile. Regarding the drug that truly mattered, the elixir of immortality, there were only the most basic remarks. These remarks described it as a beauty product and something that might help purify the body's systems. What else could one expect? There is no such thing as a panacea after all. Nothing cures all ills. Similarly, the deterioration of the human body could be slowed, but it could never be stopped. Living a decent life, eating nutritious foods and exercising regularly was the best method. Shenmei wanted something she could simply sip and make herself 10 years younger. There is no such thing. Maomao understood that perfectly well, yet she had her pride as an apothecary. Doing nothing was clearly not an option. I guess this isn't any easier for you than it is for me, she said to the rats. They might be there purely to have drugs tested on them, but they were being fed regularly. This made them plumper than your ordinary rat. The apothecary had one pair for breeding and kept the rest separated. This prevented the fortress from being overrun with rat spawn. She considered the fact that to judge whether an immortality drug had worked, she would have to observe the rat for at least the duration of its natural life. It is enough to make me light-headed. According to the last apothecary's materials, rats generally lived about 3 years, maybe 4 in some exceptional individual cases, and I am sure as hell not going to be here for 4 years. Nonetheless, she set about making the chubby rats food. That was what she was doing when she heard a voice outside. There were footsteps. It was time for the changing of the guard. Maybe that means I'll get to eat soon. She knew by now that breakfast and dinner usually arrived after the guard was changed. She set down her mortar and pestle, yawned widely and stretched her arms, making little circles with them. Then there was a thump. She saw something on the ground by the doorframe. She moved closer and discovered a scrap of paper wedged under the door. She opened it and found a message written in a child's messy handwriting. It said, "Run for it. I'll draw off the guard." The message also included a piece of wire wrapped into a circle. Kairu. Maomao thought, perhaps he realized she was a hostage, or maybe he saw that even being at this stronghold was dangerous. She didn't know which, but she saw that in his own way, and despite being a brat, he was thinking of her. Unfortunately, the thin piece of wire was not going to be enough to open the door to this room. She had plenty of wire, and good wire, right here with her. The plan was simple and childish, just like the handwriting. She heard Kairuyu's voice on the other side of the door. "Let go, let me go." Whatever he had thought he would do to take care of the guard, he had obviously failed. "What did you think you were doing?" Kairuyu was in a formal seated position on the floor. His clothes were slightly disheveled by his little rampage. The guard had called Suhari. She came quickly when she heard there had been an attempt to free Maomao. Maomao had been dragged out of her room again. "What do you mean?" Kairuyu said, trying to play dumb. Suhari gave him a cold look, then turned to Maomao. "You put him up to this, didn't you?" "Whatever do you mean?" Maomao asked, discreetly crushing the piece of paper in her hand. "Oh, that is it. I was just playing like usual when I saw that guard there was slacking off. That's what happened." Kairuyu was totally unrepentant, and Maomao figured her best bet was to play along. Even Suhari seemed to acknowledge that much. The only one who seemed to have dug in his heels was the guard, the same one who had stood at Maomao's door ever since she arrived here. "Are you calling me a liar?" Kairuyu demanded. Suhari ignored his protest but gave him a withering stare. So it was really nothing. Then listen, I never want anything to happen again. Yeah, I hear you. The guard still looked less than pleased, but all was well that ended well as long as they could agree that all was in fact well. At least it is over, Maomao thought. Except it was. Goodness, what is all this? Maomao felt a shock of fear raise gooseflesh all over her body. Footsteps echoed through the hallway. The person walking must have been wearing wooden clogs to create such a sound. Suhari's colour faded as the footsteps came closer, and she wasn't the only one affected. Kairu and the guard both went pale as well. This was why Suhari had been trying so hard to wrap things up quickly. Then Shenmei was there. She must have just gotten out of the bath because her hair was damp. It was tied up but not very elaborately. She was wearing makeup, but it was thinner than usual, giving the impression that she was blushing. Behind her were two ladies in waiting, and Lulan Kairu, his eyes sparkled for an instant when he saw them. His mouth twitched, but he did not make a sound. Perhaps one of the ladies was his mother. Nothing that warrants your attention, ma'am. No, by all means tell me. I am most interested in why the apothecary is not in her room. It was obvious that half-baked excuses were not going to work with Shenmei. Suhari, accepting reality, said brusquely, I understand that Kairu was playing outside this room and distracted the guard. For the sake of appearances, I was asking the apothecary for her perspective on events. Oh, have you been a bad boy? Shenmei's gaze settled on Kairu, whose eyes began to brim with tears. That won't do. If you don't behave, then we will have to discipline you. She stood in front of Kairu and stroked his cheek. The sharp jade nail caps on her fingers jabbed his soft skin. Perhaps a little smack on the bottom. Lady Shenmei, Suhari began, but she stopped mid-sentence. Go on. Kairu is only a young child, and he did nothing of any consequence. She trailed off, her voice growing quieter and quieter. Kairu was still watching the lady in waiting behind Lulan, Suhari and Shenmei. The woman had a vacant look in her eyes. Shenmei cocked her head. Well, that must mean someone here made a very big fuss over a very little thing. Her gaze moved to the guard. Certainly not, ma'am, he said. No. And yet it seems you are the one at fault here. That means you have to be disciplined. In her mind, Maomao could almost see the cruel twisting of Shenmei's mouth, hidden behind her folding fan. Was it possible this woman derived sexual pleasure from inflicting pain on others? Perhaps some time in the water prison will give you time to think about what you've done. Ma'am, geez, that's outrageous. Maomao did not know exactly what the water prison was, but it was much too cold to be forcing someone to stay in standing water. Maomao doubted Shenmei cared about the reason. She just enjoyed tormenting people. Maomao wanted nothing more to do with her. But at the same time, people like Shenmei annoyed her. Perhaps that is why she spoke before she could stop herself. You old witch. The words slipped quietly from her mouth, but Shenmei seemed to hear them quite clearly. She was, after all, the oldest person present. Almost before she knew what had happened, Maomao was flying sideways, her ear and temple throbbing. When she fought back the pain enough to open her eyes, she saw Shenmei. Shenmei was beet red and had her fan upraised. This confirms it. I am an idiot, Maomao thought. But her idiocy was not over yet. I told the boy to do it, she said. Shenmei's face contorted with rage. She looked like a mythical warrior demon. Someone with less courage might have wet themselves at her expression at that moment, but Maomao had plenty of experience with cruel old women. Her problem was that this cruel old woman knew no restraint. Then the fan came down hard on her shoulder. Another worthless apothecary, I see. Shenmei spat at her, and Maomao held her shoulder. Shenmei took a breath, but her anger hadn't lessened. Very well, perhaps we can inspire some repentance. Put her in the water prison. Yep, I am in trouble now. She had brought it on herself, bought and paid for. Maybe she should have kept her mouth shut, not worried about Kairu or the guard. But there was another idiot there just like Maomao. But Lady Shenmei, then we will be without an apothecary again. Shenmei grimaced at Suhari's words. Suhari stepped forward as if she would say more, but the fan came down quickly on her shoulder. She was told not to move without being told. My sincere apologies, milady. However, the fan came down again, this time on her forehead. It split the skin, producing a trickle of red blood. Shenmei grabbed Suhari's hair and dragged her close. They were soon face to face. Maomao wondered what Shenmei might do next. Shenmei licked the blood flowing from Suhari's forehead. Maomao wasn't sure what to think. However noble the blood might once have been, once sullied, it can never be clean again. Shenmei spat a combination of blood and saliva onto a piece of scrap paper. Then she flung it at Suhari. "I can't use this any longer," she said, throwing away the folding fan she had been holding. One of the ladies in waiting immediately held out another one to her. Did they carry a supply at all times? Did Shenmei beat people bloody that often? Suhari dabbed at her forehead with a handkerchief, but she did not move. She stood there, her eyes fixed on Maomao. It seems she has a strong sense of duty, Maomao thought. Suhari acted as if she felt somehow responsible for Maomao. It was partly due to her own curiosity that the apothecary was now trapped in this fortress, but nonetheless Suhari was obviously trying to protect her. But she was facing a truly evil force. Lulan stepped up behind her mother, her face impassive as she said, "Dearest mother." Shenmei didn't look up from playing with her new fan. "Yes, what is it? Since we went to all the trouble of having it made ready, I want to use it. It has been a long time since we put it to good use." "What does mean?" Maomao wondered. The way Lulan spoke made it sound deeply significant. "Ah, the Taban," Shenmei said. Suhari cringed visibly. Taban, it sounded vaguely familiar, but Maomao couldn't quite remember what it was. "It is a bit on the small side, but certainly large enough for one person. I do seem to remember our last test of it being quite effective." This time she looked at Suhari, whose face grew even more bloodless. Suhari clenched her fists so hard her knuckles turned white. "Yes, let's go with that today," Shenmei said with a smile. She looked at the two guards with her. Each guard took one of Maomao's arms and dragged her away. Maomao found herself taken to the basement of the stronghold. She went down a staircase made of angular stone, steps to a place that was rather humid. There was a wooden door leading into a circular room. The room was about 2 can across, which is about 3.5 meters. The floor was sunk by roughly 2 shaku, about 60 centimeters, but otherwise the room appeared empty. The guards shoved Maomao into the room and hung a lamp along one wall. The ceiling was high above her head. A single window was well out of her reach. "Sorry, kid," Lady Shenmei gave the orders, one of the guards said. He sounded sympathetic, though it wasn't much help. A large wooden box was brought into the cell. The guard looked at the chest, profoundly uncomfortable. Then he opened the lid and immediately ducked out of the room, closing the door behind him. Something squirmed and writhed inside. Something was trying desperately to crawl out into the light. "Ah, I see now." Yes, she had heard of the Taban. It was a form of punishment invented by a mad king in some ancient era. Someone dug a large hole and placed a criminal inside. The hole was occupied by creatures similar to those now squirming inside the box. Maomao shivered, feeling goosebumps all over her skin. She understood now why Suhari was so afraid of snakes. The writhing creature raised its sickle-shaped head from the box. A long red tongue flicked out of its mouth. It watched her with moist eyes. It looked for all the world like a living rope. Some small bugs scuttled out of the chest. Then a croaking frog emerged. Maomao began to laugh. "Ha ha ha ha," her eyes brimmed and a grin split her face from ear to ear. What beautiful creatures they were. She hadn't seen their like for a long time. Still laughing, Maomao took the hair stick from her hair. Then she produced a hairpin from the folds of her robe. From the box exploded an innumerable parade of snakes and poisonous bugs. This really came in helpful, Maomao thought. Several pieces of something resembling fish meat were stuck on the end of her hairpin. The hair ornament Shisui had given her could be split in two. The pointy part made an ideal skewer. Maomao swallowed audibly as she watched the grease drip from the sizzling meat. "I wish I had some salt or soy paste. If I could have anything I wanted once the meat was good and cooked." She blew heartily on it and her cheeks puffed out. It looked a little bony, but beggars could not be choosers. It tasted somewhat like chicken, but there was a distinct flavor of fish. This was because the fire had used fish oil. The meat was juicy and full of nutrients. It was almost hibernation season after all. Grease flecked Maomao's lips as she chewed. She became aware of some kind of commotion outside. She wanted to grill her catch before the fire went out, so she ignored the noise, skewered another piece of meat, and started cooking. She couldn't help mumbling, "I really want some salt." That was when she realized a man was standing before her, looking flabbergasted. "What are you doing?" "I am eating. Do you happen to have any salt?" "Of course I don't have any salt." Well, it had been a bit of a long shot, admittedly. The man looked around the room, then put his hand to his mouth with a hrgh. He seemed to be trying to keep himself from vomiting. Something about him seemed familiar to Maomao. A closer look showed that he was the guard she had argued with earlier. What was he doing here? "What are you eating?" "Snake, sir. I wish you had just said fish." This guard said the strangest things, Maomao thought. But it was all right. She stuffed the rest of the cooked meat in her mouth and swallowed. "I thought this was supposed to be a torture chamber," the guard said. "And I suppose for some it would be a living hell. Many might have wished never to set foot in the room, but for Maomao it was a treasure trove."